completely destroyed the Kaiser Chiefs in the African Championship game, and it's a very strong player. I'm the kind of person, I'm an Ahly fan, so I'd be happy to see somebody beat this. I was really happy when Sundowns destroyed them a few days and 2 years ago. But I don't know if this myth is true or not, but it's interesting to speak with them. These are mostly Zamalek fans, and it's a fan who managed to, it's a survivor, and he managed to get away from the barbed wire, and you can see from his vantage point, he's showing how the internet won't fail us. So you can see, it's a bit messy. It's a bit messy because it's from on the top of that tunnel. And this is the barbed wire tunnel essentially. It's like made of metal bars and barbed wire. Obviously a horrible plan as far as like policing preparation for public gathering in Rome. And what happens people very quickly started overcrowded that tunnel and started spilling out of it and started destroying it because they were suffocating. So they started getting out of it. And so the police response to that was that they started firing tear gas at people who were getting away from the tunnel. Tear gas was the only weapon that was used in this case. Well, tear gas in a closed space is a very lethal weapon. I mean, it's a less lethal weapon, and I believe it's a useful less lethal weapon. In my work on like using less lethal weapons, I'm a champion of tear gas, I'm notorious for that. And my colleagues are working this kind of thing. But obviously, if it's used in that way in a closed space, which is the first warning that comes with, not obviously from the companies that produce it, but from people like us who are, work on like regulating the use of force and regulating the deployment of less lethal weapons in the context of protest, is that you don't use it in a closed space. Now, you see people breaking out of it, and again, I apologize, it's a bit messy, and then you hear the sirens of the police cars. And then now you start hearing the sound of like tear gas being lobbed. From compressive asphyxia. So this is a case that, these are much smaller numbers obviously compared to other cases, especially during the course of the revolution and 2 years of like intense mobilization. But it's important because it's almost got all the features of how of a completely from start to finish botched police operation, where like the way you plan it, the way you prepare for it, the way you respond to any slight change in the plan, because that's a very important aspect of planning police response to protest. And I was having a conversation with Jameelah earlier. It reminds me of Marikana in that sense, because the key thing about Marikana was how it was almost set up for failure from the beginning. The way they planned the response, the deployment of the tactical response teams, the use of the barbed wire, and the fact that you gave people no place to exit. They started firing tear gas at them, and then they ran away and they were met with light ammunition. Everything about this, the kind of weapons that were available to them, the way it was planned from the beginning, and the response to any slight change in the plan, because an important part of police protest is, you're supposed to be trained in crowd dynamics. Obviously, this sounds very theoretical, but plans don't go the way they don't go the exact way you thought they would. The crowd will have a different response to any slight agitation, and you're supposed to have plan B and C and D. And so the plan B and C and D here in the case of Marikana was brutal and ended up and led to a lot of death. In both cases, the police has not taken the responsibility for that. This is not the accountability case. Jameelah, I want to say something.
After the after the Marikana Commission, we got a lot more insight into the plan and just who drafted it, whether they were the qualified people to have drafted that plan in the first place. It was drafted all the way in, I forget now, sorry, but north of Johannesburg, far away from the northwest province where Marikana was situated. There were very few public order policing senior officials involved in drafting that plan, so all kinds of problems, as you say, but from the beginning that plan was doomed to failure. And the Marikana Commission did bring out some of those issues. It didn't end up going anywhere in the end, but we at least learned more. We understood what happened, all the things that went wrong. Our failure in South Africa is always to then do something with that information. But so I was just wondering, after that incident in Egypt, whether there was any kind of process that allowed some of the stuff to come to the fore about what happened, why was a barbed wire tunnel the chosen plan of the day, and whether there was any accountability for the police officials involved on that day.
No, we're in a much darker place today. And this was the police narrative. The police obviously immediately started talking about fans who didn't have tickets and the level of impunity and lack of accountability and the failure of the police reform project, which had gone some way in 2011 and 2012, but and I was one of many people who worked a lot on that. And this was a political opportunity where the police had to be responsive to attempts to reform them. But it's the failure of the political elite and political actors who were struggling over power, and they constantly deprioritized that issue because every single one of them wanted the police on their side. And that's an important thing, and I guess there's similarities probably with the post-apartheid process in South Africa. But because of that, we got to a point where we were completely losing the discourse battle even. So the police would not see this plan as a violation of human rights, or as a violation of even from a practical policing point of view, right? No one was held accountable. They prosecuted a lot of the fans, which I understand also was going to happen in the case of Marikana, but I think charges were dropped ultimately. But I have another example. So I'm interested in accountability, like we were talking, and I work in accountability, and it's a very frustrating environment to be working in. Before the legal battles we were able to win before the revolution, when we thought we were living in the worst dictatorship ever, were much more than what we had afterwards. We had a couple more, but until today, we always think what keeps you going. Part of what keeps us going is that we've accumulated a lot of experience and don't know what else to do in our lives, and we need a job. But you do need to try to, and every once in a while you get a win. I'm going to talk about one of these cases, and it was right before this incident actually. So this was February 8th, 2015. The one I'm going to talk about was an incident that happened on January 25th, 2015. And that's a couple of weeks before that. It's the anniversary of the revolution. Now, every year, usually the anniversary of the revolution will be there will be an event of mobilization and protest. And it started dwindling in numbers until the police took complete control of the street. Interestingly, Mark was talking yesterday about how long it takes some people to realize that they're living in a dictatorship. We're always living in a dictatorship, but on different positions on the continuum of authoritarianism. But it's the inability to utilize the street at all on the anniversary of 2015 that made us really aware of how much public space and political space has been shut down. Because what happened in this was the first time that no one was protesting anymore. But a small group of activists, they thought that this is not going to be very controversial. They went to Tahrir Square, and there's a memorial, a really ugly memorial erected in memory of the martyrs, and they wanted to put some flowers on that. And they had a group of 20 people. Police wouldn't allow it, and they ordered them to disperse, and they started shooting at them with not live ammunition, shotgun pellets. Now, one person was killed, and it's that person, Jameelah, who's in this photo. And I apologize if it's a bit graphic, but it's a very powerful photo. The reason I'm showing you this photo is the photo is the reason that we had a court case against a police officer. Now, this is the only person who was a casualty of this process, compared to obviously a lot of other protests. There were a huge number of casualties and no accountability process. But you got to work with whatever little opportunities you get, is what I believe. And in this case, we had a very brave photojournalist who was there, and we took a couple of photos and a video. There's a video actually. I'm not showing you the video, but you can. In the video, you see the whole thing happening. Here, she's in the last throes of death, and her comrade is picking her up and walking away with her, but then she dies very quickly. And she was shot in the back You can see that in the second photo. This is the police officer who shot him, we believe, and he's the one who got prosecuted. A few other people were got convicted, and he's wearing a mask, but he was identified. And he shot with shotgun pellet, which they believe is a less lethal weapon, and doesn't, they don't think it's. And they would obviously always claim that they're acting in self-defense. But she's shot in her back, and the video captures it, and the photo captures it, and because of that, even as reluctant as the court system usually is to prosecuting and convicting police officers, they couldn't get away from it. This photo went viral. It was like all over the world. It was in front pages of a lot of international newspapers. It's this and a couple of other photos. And like I said, you see that she's being shot in the back. You see the police officer is standing very close for to use shotgun pellets. There's always a random person in Egypt and protest walking like completely oblivious to what's happening. Looks like he's going to buy newspapers. You see in all the videos. So this is, I want to show you this photo because essentially, like I said, that is the reason that this is a case we were able to work on. We went through like a lot of, we got a 15-year sentence and then there was an appeal process and ordered a retrial, and then finally that police officer got a 10-year sentence. This is a lot more than we usually get in Egypt. It's not much, and I was telling Jameelah earlier that it's almost, I would say rare, but I don't know of any case where police officers were prosecuted, were charged with murder in Egypt, no matter how much the evidence is there to prove intent. So it's usually what we call in Egyptian criminal law battery or assault that led to death. Also in cases of torture, because the crime of torture in Egypt is very strictly defined. So you can only prosecute them on the basis of that, if you want to be realistic. We always try to change it to murder, of course, wouldn't hear it. And this is the maximum probably sentence that you can get so usually you get 3 to 7 year sentence. We got a 10-year sentence here for this police officer. Now we have cases every now and then. I mean, there's a lot of death from police contact in Egypt outside of the case context of protest. But every now and then you've got a case like that. In the Mohammed Mahmoud protest in 2011 that I mentioned earlier, there was, if you look it up, it's very interesting. It's called the eye sniper case. It's someone who was captured on video. He was shooting shotgun pellets towards protesters, and you can hear one of his colleagues in the police say, make something, essentially congratulate him for hitting someone's eye. And a lot of people lost eyes from the shotgun pellets. Not as many as, this is quite popular in Kashmir, for instance, if any of you interested in how there was a big mobilization. A couple of years ago, the police were a lot of people were blinded because a lot of police in India were responding to protests using shotgun pellets, which I think is a weapon that has no place in policing protest. So this was an example of accountability in a very authoritarian context that you're still able to, still able to achieve. And I think, again, when we were talking earlier, Jameelah, Marikana for me, when I was reading some of the commission report, and I find it really interesting because in terms of process and procedure, we can't have that in Egypt. And as I was saying, you guys in South Africa are very good at processes. You have they don't necessarily deliver in the end, but the process itself is I'm interested in institutions, so I love these processes. I clearly aspire to be a bureaucrat of some sort. But but there are many reasons why it didn't deliver in the end, and it could deliver in the future. You have something that you can work with in the future.
Well, this is a very interesting case of essentially a photograph leading to a criminal case, and it is quite unusual, even in South Africa, for a police officer to be criminally convicted of an offence in the course and scope of their duties. In most cases, it would be an internal investigation followed by possibly a civil claim of damages, but unlikely to be treated as a crime. But it's a very specific type of accountability, I suppose. It's very individualized. And whereas if we look at Marikana, it was the complete opposite. It was the wide-scale discourse and rhetoric of accountability without the follow-through of a criminal justice process. And was there any follow-through on this kind of case into institutional culture or the way in which the police conduct themselves? Did they become more cautious about about policing protests or anything
Well,
like
I
this?
mean, it's difficult to say. My sense is no, but we haven't had much protest at all since then. We've had a big protest in 2016 where they were able to arrest everyone. And when they're able to do that, they tend not to like fire everyone. No, they didn't arrest everyone. They arrested a lot of people. They managed to disperse the protest. I mean, some people, an outside observer could say like, oh, clearly this is the influence of that, but I wouldn't say so. I think the organization culture in the police in Egypt still very much allows a very quick escalation to maximum force, which is the main issue. And there's still a very politicized institution that have vendettas against groups like police, football fans, and revolutionaries, and Islamists, and so and that's another aspect of the organization and of the institutional culture that is difficult to change. And accountability, I mean, I believe it's supposed to achieve a short-term goal and a long-term goal. The short-term goal is what you had here. The person who's the main culprit and potentially his commanders, whoever ordered, whatever, they serve some prison time for what they did. But also there's the aspect of it where like it begins a review process. You change laws, whatever you do. That hasn't happened in Egypt, but it's something that I'm invested in. And this would bring us to the final part of the presentation, unless you have any other questions.
Yeah, maybe just one question before that. So the video you showed us of the football match, I mean, that is technically not a protest per se. And I don't know if it turned into one in the moment with the barbed wire, if it essentially became a protest, but it didn't start out that way. It was really just an example of crowd control. And I mean, in South Africa, our crowd control regulations cover all types of public situations, not only protests. So, for example, they were used very often and in fact reviewed just before the 2010 Soccer World Cup. And so those regulations are used across the board whenever you have a situation of a big crowd, not only a protest, although the Regulation of Gatherings Act would be specific for demonstrations and protests. And we can see in South Africa there's definitely a difference in the way public order policing, which covers both protest and non-protest situations, but there's a big difference in the way the police polices those two different contexts. There's definitely a bigger move to escalation when it's a political protest or some other kind of protest versus some other thing, even though on the ground it might look the same.
Yeah.
Is there any difference in Egypt if you look at that kind of football situation versus other protests, particularly between the 2011-2015 periods?
No, I mean, I think what this example of the football stadium demonstrates is that it isn't, in terms of the police response. But that could be for multiple reasons, and I think the key difference here between the situation of how they respond to like big sporting events in South Africa, aside from the one particular example of the World Cup, obviously, if there was a World Cup in Egypt, they probably wouldn't want to be killing fans all over the place. But the police think of, and a lot of people think of, and football fans think of stadiums as sites of political contestation and resistance. And they've been utilized like that for a very long time. And an immediate aftermath of the revolution, so between 2011 and 2012, which is the very brief period when we had the upper hand over the police, discursively at least. If you look, I could show some like really interesting videos where all the fans would be constantly in every single game chanting in unison, just swearing at the police. And then the police are standing there and they're unable, because of the power dynamics at the moment, unable to do anything about it. And then they're taking the revenge. You can think of it this way, like 4 years later. They have a relationship with football fans. They probably don't have that relationship with handball fans. But with football fans, they think of them in the same way they think of political street movements. So that's a legal and political cultural difference between Egypt and a lot of other places, and I'm sure other places have a similarity with that.
And I think definitely during apartheid, we would have seen that same kind of correlation with social and community organizations, whether sporting or art or anything else, suffering that same kind of heavy-handedness by the police, because they were also seen as organizing structures to challenge the state. And it's, it really comes down to that, the state seeing any kind of public gathering as an existential crisis or threat to itself.
Yeah, and that changed after apartheid, you would say? maybe there isn't as much mobilization against the...
I think it has turned towards more socio-economic protests, and even in situations like Marikana or others, you can see, I think, the increasing state realization that this is actually an existential threat to it, or at least an existential threat to the governing party, which becomes synonymous with the state. But probably not in the same way yet, or to the same extent as it would have been under apartheid. So you wanted to move on to the last part?
Yeah, so the last part, we were talking about long-term institutional, legal and legislative changes. So we moved on from like small wins in criminal cases to the other aspect of my work, and that should be of interest to lawyers and socio-legal scholars, and which is law again as a site of discourse of battles, as a site of discourse. Because we worked a lot on like changing the law and changing the procedures governing police in Egypt, and that's all been chucked out of the window now, and there's no chance, and we don't even have access to parliament the way we used to in the immediate aftermath of, a few years after the revolution. And we would be scared to even approach the parliament because they're all police officers in disguise. And but I still believe in the importance of these struggles, these like legal language struggles, not just on the national level but also on the regional and on the international level. And we were talking earlier about civil society cooperation across the region on things, on changing. And there's a lot that happened in the last 5 years, internationally and regionally in the African continent, particularly on the issue of freedom of association and assembly, and on policing assemblies and use of force in the context of assembly. And I think that's very important. So it started on the international level. And we're talking about soft law here, right? So I'm talking about the two examples, actually, the only two readings that I had was the joint report of the two special UN rapporteurs, the rapporteur on freedom of association and assembly and the rapporteur on extrajudicial killings. They were commissioned to do a joint report that was supposed to provide practical guidelines for the proper management of assemblies. That's what they call the proper management of assemblies. And this is the first UN document of such where you see such details, and it was adopted in 2016. In such details, an attempt to operationalize a lot of these principles of democratic policing when it comes to policing assemblies and protests. And the other instrument I'm talking about is the African Commission for Human and People's Rights Guidelines on Policing Assemblies in Africa. Now, this is, as far as soft law, law doesn't get any softer than this, right? So it's not going to, we're probably not going to see a lot of implementation of it anytime soon. But, and especially when I'm talking about UN mechanisms, I'm not interested in UN mechanisms to achieve something. I'm interested in language and discourse, because that stays for a very long time. And I think it's important to change the way, because that's the beginning when it trickles down to national institutions. That's the beginning of changing a political culture and how the police think about protest. Because essentially what we want to change at the very beginning is the police thinking of a protest and an assembly not as a threat, but as a very fundamental exercise of rights that is essential to building a healthy state-society relationship.
I mean, of course, whether that's even possible in an authoritarian state is, for the police to think for themselves that...
It's not possible in Egypt at the moment, but, you got to think long-term. Again, as Mark was saying yesterday, he was talking about secularism and religion. You throw law and religion, you wait for 200 years and then you have a functional state. I think of policing in the same way. We're living in very dark times. And it's not just in Egypt, and it's not just in Africa. We talk all the time about the erosion of liberal democratic norms all over the world. But you want to leave some little time bombs, that might of progressive thinking and progressive legal language that might sometime in the future have an effect. That's at least not the socio-legal critical scholar. That's the NGO side of my work. That's what I try to achieve all the time. And we were, very keen working together. So my organization in Egypt had a very good working relationship with a couple of NGOs from the continent. We have a very good relationship with the Legal Resources Center here in South Africa, and we worked together in the African consultation part of the process that led to the adoption of the joint report of the two special rapporteurs on the proper management of assemblies. And there probably isn't time to go into this, but we can talk about it in the Q&A. You look at the principles, you look at how the principles are operationalized, and it's divided into like pre-protest, during protest, use of force, notification systems, how they're supposed to work, accountability after protest. And then after that, another process started on mid-2016 that created the African Commission for Human and People's Rights Guidelines and Policing Assemblies, which was adopted by the African Commission in the General Assembly in April 2017. And it's a very good document in terms of legal language, as far as software goes, quite progressive. And we were involved in the drafting procedure, and I recall that this, and I was telling you earlier, this was a process that was actually spearheaded by a Johannesburg-based organization called ACOF, the African Policing Oversight Forum, something like that. But they were convening a lot of NGOs and a lot of community activists, and they had access to some policing institutions in different African countries. And again, depending on the power dynamics and how open the state is and the political culture is, they would never have access to a police officer or commander from Egypt. And this is one of the other problems that makes it so difficult. Like, the Egyptian state is very resistant to change. Part of that is because they have this long historical legacies. They like to look down on other institutions in the region, in the Middle East and in Africa, as being like, these are all post-colonial states. We're not a post-colonial state. We teach, in the police academy in Egypt, we teach like Iraqi police commanders and Libyan police commanders, and so we don't take lessons from outsiders. And that's something that, I wish I had that. That's the way that some other countries have it, because you use whatever tools are available to you to try to affect change. But I remember sitting in the same room in the drafting process of the African Commission guidelines with police commanders from Kenya and from Burkina Faso, and they were involved in drafting this process. It doesn't necessarily mean that the police forces are going to be implementing it. It could mean that in the future. And I know of one study that is taking place right now that was commissioned by the Jameelah Karim or something. They're looking into one country that's supposed to be operationalizing, which is Malawi. And obviously power dynamics are going to play here. It probably is easier to try to have that kind of like working relationship with the police institutions in Malawi. So they're supposed to have operationalized some of it, and there's some sort of audit that's happening right now. I don't know if it's included or not. But again, the importance of this, for instance, this is when I think of law as a site of discourse. You establish certain principles of like legality, proportionality, but just establish in the language that dissipates. It's already made it into the Egyptian constitution in 2014. How like the police relationship with like citizens, with public assemblies, notions of graduated use of force. There's another photo that I had here actually. I just stumbled upon it like a little bit ago when I was doing some research. I don't know if it's the best example, but I find it quite interesting. It's from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Force, the funniest named police force on the planet. And so they have this situation management model for like how they use force in response to protest. Now, this is very much policing language, so bear with me. But it's interesting how the language has changed. I think it's not very accurate, so don't quote me on it. I think this was between 2000 and 2009. This was quite popular in policing literature. This one. It's in English and French, and it shows the continuum of how, like, this gives the police officer, these are the protesters, these are the tools available to you. Protesters could be cooperative, passive resistant, aggressive. It's in English and French. And then, you get to the situation where there's a threat of grievous bodily harm or death, right? This is supposed to be the only situation where you're allowed to use live ammunition or lethal force, whether the context is a protest or not a protest. And then you have, the tools you're employing: communication, physical control, and the general intermediate weapons. Intermediate weapons and then lethal weapons is a term that no one uses anymore. I think they've updated it. Because you see it, this one, which is, if you try to research that stuff, you find this, it will come up more easily. And this is from 2009 procedural documents, the same police force. And it gets a little, the language is a bit softer. We talk a lot about like staff presence. Staff presence is a police tool. You know, just presence is something that's available to you. Think of it as, you know, an intervention already. Verbal communication, conflict resolution, there's an emphasis on conflict resolution and negotiation, which is making its way into the guidelines governing the work in the police in a lot of countries, but also into international and regional legal instruments. And then, you know, you see the graduated, the intermediate weapons are like broken down into restraint equipment, patrol dogs, don't look at that, physical handling, my favorite weapons, chemical agent spray agents, and then impact weapons. That includes, which I think don't have any place in protest. Not all of them. I mean, a baton is an impact weapon. Kinetic impact weapons tend to be the ones like shotgun pellets, which are very indiscriminate, but also they can be very lethal, and they don't really serve the purpose of anything. You know, like tear gas is an indiscriminate weapon, but people can disperse. But this is indiscriminate, but it still will hit only one person. You just don't know when it's going to hit him, and he's then possibly will die. This is a conversation that, you know, less lethal weapons. We can talk about that if you want in the Q&A. But so yeah, so you see, it's a lot more graduated, and the language includes a lot more emphasis. I mean, the way they describe the situation itself is different. Emphasis on conflict resolution, on negotiation, and the whole range of like graduate options available to you before you get to like use of impact weapons and then use of lethal force, which again should only be related to a threat of death or grievous bodily harm. Now, you could say that this is just very theoretical, but this is what they're taught in classrooms, police officers in Canada. And I think that's something that could, on the very long term, could have a potentially positive or like a progressive effect. As long as you have police forces, you have to work with these, and if you know, we can be very critical of that. We can of these processes, of the superstructures. You know, when you're not really changing the fundamentals, but you always have a police force that has legit monopoly over the legitimacy of use of force, as long as you have capitalism. So until we manage to dismantle capitalism, we have to work with like police institutions, and we have to try to reform them, I believe. So I'll end on that note. I've got a few more examples of accountability of a lot of things, but I'll open it and we can have a chat. Thank you.